Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. A, and you're listening to the Empowered Living Zone at Transformation Talk Radio. And with me today is my guest, Dr. Pat Baccili. Dr. Pat is an international award-winning talk radio host, TV commentator, certified career and belief coach, dynamic seminar leader and inspirational speaker, award-winning author and researcher, and the CEO and owner of a successful inspirational company, Unlimited Possibilities Now. Dr. Pat is well respected in her various roles in the human potential field, and she's received numerous awards for her empowering message on the radio. I'm deeply grateful and honored to have Dr. Pat join me today. Welcome, Dr. Pat.
It is so great to be here. I am glad we're continuing the conversation and bringing this forward, because it is really the point of contact today for so many people to really understand this. And, part of this too, when I think about what we talked about last time, and you're going to recap that for us, but we're going to talk about, this idea of stepping out into the world and really looking at, did I really get it wrong? Did I get it all wrong? How do I know I got it all wrong? And what is the real purpose of lived experience? And I know you're going to do that today, but being able to identify the pathway we want to go on and know when we're on the right pathway, or maybe we took a little adjustment and we sort of got off. What do? Do we throw in the towel, as we hear most people say, or is there a blueprint? And I think that's what you're going to share today. You're going to share that inner blueprint that we have that will get us out of every situation we don't want to be in, and then also get us into situations we don't want to be in.
Thanks, Dr. Pat. And, of course, I don't think I'd be doing what I do for a living if I ever believed in throwing in the towel. I will tell you, persistence is one of my superpowers.
Yeah. Every time I throw in the towel, I go online and I buy 6 or 7 more.
Agreed. Quitting is not in my vocabulary.
Yeah, I get it.
But I do. It's interesting. I decided to make this a two-parter. And the reason I wanted to make this a two-parter is because even though this is the last part, the last element of my self-empowerment equation, the recipe, it's definitely not the least. And it's a really important element. And I want to make sure that my listeners really understand this. And as you said, Dr. Pat, this really is the point of contact. This really is the point of contact. And I want to make sure that we all are on the same page with what this means. And this whole idea of the last element of the empowered self-empowerment equation is called lived experience or experience. And, I want to do a quick recap of what we covered last week, just for clarity's sake. And what I mean by lived experience is that, we have lots of things that are happening. There are events, there are people, there are things, there are places. There are all these things that happen outside of us. And yet they're just things. They don't become experience until we actually take them in. And we take them in our being, and we experience, we feel them. We often hear this phrase, felt sense. And felt sense, I want to make really clear, is not just feelings. It's just not emotions, but it's also sensations. Our bodies do a lot of things in response to stimuli or information that's outside of us. So we don't have experience until we take it inside of us and we actually experience it. And feelings or emotions are a part of the felt sense, but there are other things happening like sensations in our body that is also part of the equation of lived experience. And in some ways, you can kind of think about this as our own personal GPS system. You know, our bodies are our own personal GPS system, you know, and a lot of times people aren't connected to their own internal being. And this can be problematic when it comes to personal power, because, you know, our power comes from the capacity to choose. And if we don't know where we are with something, we don't know how we feel about something, we don't know its impact on us, it's hard for us to choose purposefully and powerfully. Does that make sense? Yeah. And
I think for so many people, and I think I can't remember which show, but we really made a point, a very important point, that awareness, you have got to have that in your wheelhouse. Now, why sometimes, to your point, Dr. A, why sometimes we don't want to turn the awareness light bulb on? Why is that? Well, we can talk about that today because it's the same reason you don't want to put your hand in a flame, a hot fire, right? Because sometimes when we put awareness on, we turn that light bulb on, the vision is revealed. How you see the vision, though, is what we're talking about today. Gosh, I failed all the corporate assessment tests. You know, like you and I work with we work with businesses, right? We go into business. So we can't talk about our clients, but having been on the other side of that, all the tests they give you, according to the experts, I failed. I failed the Myers-Briggs, too much of an introvert to be of any help to anybody. But here's the one that I failed. I'll never forget it. It's like the big class with the Rorschach and, you know, like they give you, you know, like you're in that big team environment, they give you that, and they give you the half glass full question. So they give you that and everybody fills it out anonymously. So everything's supposed to be anonymous, except they get my answer. And then they want to know who did this. So they ask the question, what do you think? The glass is half empty or half full? And I write, I don't even understand the question. Why would anybody have a glass that's half of anything? I said, you get a glass. You want to fill the glass. You want the glass to be full. I said, would you, I went into a little story. I said, who goes to a bar and says, give me a half a glass of beer? And I went on about it. Honestly, I just didn't understand the question. I didn't come from that. I was raised in a family that wouldn't have been an option. But to your point, this is the lived world. This is the world we live in, and we get questions. And so they had to call me out. And an anonymous, so this is why consultants really don't have good reputations, right? But what we're talking about today is when we're living out there, and we are out there, and we are thinking of out there, and sometimes we're really in the moment of who we are. You may bump up to people that will tell you that's not really who you are, or what you are is not good enough, or what you are doesn't fit in. And that's part of what you're talking about today. You know, you have to be able to talk about a conversation where each of us gets to be who we are, even in the world of half glasses, half empty, half full. And then you make them explain what I think is the most ridiculous question on the planet. And of course, then they don't want to promote you. So this is the world that we're living in, but this is how we're talking about it today. We're talking about how do we achieve a goal that some people say we have to achieve, for example, happiness. I am perfectly happy, always have been, not having a half a glass of anything, Dr. A. I don't know. What about you?
Oh, I love it, Dr. Pat. I love it. You know, it's interesting. There's a number of things that you brought up here. Um, what is we don't really know who we are, and we don't know what makes us happy without going inside, right? We can't always be focused outside. You know,
Right.
I like to use the analogy of the chocolate cake. You know, most people love chocolate cake, right? And I use the analogy, okay, let's say you love chocolate cake and you're down to your last slice of chocolate cake. And you have an option here. You can scarf it down, okay? And when you scarf it down, you're really left wanting more. Or you may savor every single bite of that chocolate cake. It becomes an experience. You take it in, you take the taste, the smell, the texture, the way that it feels on your tongue. You take that all in. And by the time you're finished with that one slice of chocolate cake, you're filled, you are satiated, you are happy. And lived experience is exactly the same way. Is, you know, we find, you know, again in the American culture, and we often talk about the American culture, is we're a hustle and bustle kind of culture, and we don't ever really stop to really smell the roses. And consequently, when we don't stop, we're in a constant state of yearning and searching because we're not filled up. And yet it is so important, going back to the whole purpose of my message in terms of self-empowerment, you know, getting, even bringing it back to self-empowerment, when we are filled up, when we are satiated, when we are happy, it's a feedback loop. You know, it just keeps
Yeah.
feeding on itself. As a matter of fact, there's research out there that shows that positive psychological states actually lead to greater sense of empowerment. Okay, how does that happen? What's the mechanism? Okay, if we're in a positive place, so we feel happy, we're fulfilled, we're filled up, we're happy, it leads to being more optimistic. When we're more optimistic, we have higher levels of motivation and energy. When we have higher levels of motivation and energy, we're more likely to pursue what we want, and we're more likely to overcome challenges as they present themselves. And that makes us feel more empowered. And then, of course, that builds and boosts our self-esteem. It boosts our self-confidence, and boom, there we are again with
Yeah.
personal power. So it just feeds on each other.
Yeah, I love it. I love this topic. You know, there's a lot of research that has come out now recently, you know, research about happiness, right? Um, we're talking about this today, but the one thing I think that we know and we learn, and I don't remember who the person was that gave me a book, gave me two books at a point in time in my life when I was really lost. I mean, real, I was really lost. It was right before my 40th birthday. I was a mess. I was lost. I hadn't stopped drinking or using at that point, but I was on my way. And they handed me two books, and I think it was three. And I kind of scoffed at them. You know, when people hand you books and they're not like fun? Like people never hand me fun books. Like nobody ever gave me like a Harry Potter book, right? So when I'm given books, I'm given the entire Dune series. I'm given the entire what is that one? Three Body series, and then I'm given Viktor Frankl's books. Yeah,
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl. Google him, folks. You see, you can give me a lot of studies on research, and you can give me a lot of books, but give me the book by Viktor Frankl, and I am reading about a man in a concentration camp that's happy. What the bleep? You see, this isn't about you being able to do it or me or Viktor Frankl. What you and I are talking about is sharing a message that says everybody can do it. The glass isn't half empty and it's not half full. The glass is full. Isn't that what your message is today when you talk about the empowered living zone? You're asking people to take that first step with an idea that they can be happy.
Yes. Well, and not only that, Dr. Pat, is that not only the idea that you can be happy, but it doesn't matter what's happening outside of you. Look at Viktor Frankl. My goodness, he's in a concentration camp. He's starving. It's miserable. It's hopeless. It's desperate. And yet he found meaning. He found purpose in life in such dire circumstances. You know, I'm curious, Dr. Pat, what was your take home with with that book? That is a powerful book. If you were to give it a one-liner, a bottom liner, what would you say it would be?
Well, let me talk about the man first, because I got intrigued with the man before I got intrigued with the book. I mean, clearly I did my research, and, you have to go back before, you could Google. Now you can Google how fast your fingernail grows. All right. Right. But it's not, you can, but it hasn't always been like that. But I really started to look at Frankel. And you know what I love about this man? He did something I don't think that I would have been able to do. This is a guy that as a teenager corresponded with Freud. Did anybody talk to Freud? I don't know. But he started to talk to Freud, and he started to ask him permission to publish one of his papers. So you see, I love this about this guy, because even as a teenager, he didn't really care who Freud was. I'm sure he understood who Freud was, but here he is. And, he graduated high school and and this is the 1920s, folks, just to give you a perspective. We just need to bring you back in time. Time does not matter in a conversation like this, because in the world today, we're facing similar problems, right? But when you talk about this, what I loved about this book, and also he wrote a book about happiness. I don't know how many people know that. But when you read about this, what I was touched by was the horrific nature of his circumstance out of the gate. And he brings you back to it as if you're living it, but you can't. I mean, you know what I mean? And even to this day, people don't want to recognize the Holocaust. But when you think about what he did, coming from beautiful Austria, oh my gosh, hello, right? Just, he prepared himself. Here's what I love. His life before that prepared him to become who he was meant to become. And if you really looked at the Empowered Living Zone, you will see that he is a perfect blueprint to look at for how to navigate through that. Because that's the work you're doing, Dr. A. What you're doing is you're bringing out to the forefront, and you're saying, look, there is a method, there is a process, there is an intention to the Empowered Living Zone. And this, if we pull upon what we've learned from others, we'll learn, and this is my takeaway. Viktor Frankl is no different than you and me. And if Viktor Frankl could, this is my big takeaway. This was my takeaway back then. It was like, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. But I didn't have the tools to do it. That's what your show is about. You see, I knew I could do it, but I didn't know how to start. And that led me on a journey. See, that's what I love about somebody, some random person that somehow thought I could benefit from this book. I can't remember who gave me the book to this day. I have the book. But that book, and then the second book was Power versus Force. Sometimes my friends look at me and I will never get the Velveteen Rabbit. That will be not a book they will give me. But the takeaway was, he did it. I can do it. That's the takeaway. That's why we're doing this show. That's why we use these examples. Don't you think? That's why.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you made a very important point, Dr. Pat. We're no different. We're no different than Viktor Frankl. We're no different in the sense of, when you think about, and boy, I couldn't recommend his book highly. That's one of the must reads in a lifetime, right? In terms of its impact. When you read that book, what you realize, or what you see in his words, is his search was not outside of himself.
Yeah.
I mean, it just gave me goosebumps when I said that.
I got him too. I got him right here. Yeah, I got him here. He lost everything.
Yeah.
So people ask me about coming out of the other side of COVID. And I want to get back to this, because this is what we're really talking about today. If you don't know who this man is, please just go online and Google him. And it's Victor with a K. But many people don't know what he lost. This is a guy 9 months after his marriage is sent to a him and his whole family, it wasn't just him, was sent to a concentration camp. His father died of starvation there and pneumonia. I think they're all in the 40s, 44, 43, 44. This is a man, all of his surviving members were sent to Auschwitz. And so here we are. His mother and brother were murdered in the gas chambers. I mean, I'm not kidding. You don't make this up, right? And then his wife, Lily, no, not Lily, his wife, Tilly, I think Tilly died later. How? How did he find meaning? But that's what today's show is about, because we are looking for something on the outside of us. Social media is a $1 billion industry that's based on looking for things on the outside of us. And I'm not saying that's all wrong, because sometimes, Dr. A, don't we need a reference? Don't we need a point of reference? But the real change and the magic, that starts inside, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's where all the power and magic is in the inside. And his book is a perfect representation of that truth. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how we as Americans, we lose our personal power because we are so focused on what's out there instead of right here in here. You're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat, and we'll be right back. We are back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat. If you'd like the opportunity to work with me personally, or you'd like to hear more about the Empowered Living Zone or psychosocial, psychospiritual transformational coaching, you're welcome to reach out to me via website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Dr. Pat, I love that we ended the last segment with a very, very powerful experience with Victor Frankl. And if anything is a representation of the power and resilience of the human spirit, his life story is amazing. And I think what is so profound about that is that he, I suspect that he had to dig very deep within his being to find that. And as you mentioned, we're no different. He didn't have something special that we don't have. We all have this. And yet we're so far away from it. We're so far away from the depths of our being. And what we tend to do instead is we focus, especially the American culture, we focus outside of ourselves. We're always focusing on to the next thing. And, I ran across TED Talk, psychologist. His name's Dr. Robert Holden. I actually recommend the listeners to listen to this TED Talk. It's called Destination Addiction. And in this TED Talk, he describes this compulsive behavior that Americans have that is fueled by this erroneous belief that happiness is somewhere else. It's out there. It's at the next stop, that success is out there. And as a result, we are constantly living in the not now. And unless we give up this idea that happiness is out there somewhere, we're never going to be happy with where we are right now. He describes this urge of, life on fast forward, 2 times speed, constantly striving for something, but never arriving because we never stop to actually experience life. And as a result, we're psychologically absent. We're not here. We're always chasing something, and we're missing out on the beauty, the depth, and the fulfillment that comes from really stopping and smelling the roses. It's so important. Yeah. And what we'll find is fulfillment isn't about getting somewhere. It's not about getting to this place that we're yearning for. But fulfillment isn't about getting the thing.
Yeah.
Fulfillment is about the experience of going toward the thing and then having the thing and actually experiencing the thing. So it's not the destination, it's the journey that brings that fulfillment.
Yeah. I love that we're talking about this because so they have this world report that comes out every year. It's a happiness report. And so people are always shocked to find out that Finland is the happiest country in the world with overall score of 7.741 for the seventh year in a row. 7 years in a row. And then they list things. So I want to get your take on this. So they list things as if you were to read the list of things, most people see them as external, but underneath this are internal constructs. For example, like your take on this. One of the things they say, it's kind of weird the way they categorize it. So when you talk about Finland's happiness, it includes generosity. They say it's at the top of the list, because they believe people are likely to expect lost wallets to be returned. Now, that has very little to do with generosity, but that's the way they put it. But think about that. What's really underneath that? What is in the people's hearts that live there, right? Let's talk about that. In the heart, because that's what you're talking about, right? Below the neck. Mm-hmm. But if we look above, what's in their hearts? Likely to expect lost wallets to be returned. You see, there's a belief they have. It's called trust. Mm-hmm. It's not that the wallet gets little legs and finds its way home, but they have a belief in the people that live there or people that come there. That's an inside job. Isn't that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and when you think about even the idea of trust, I think as Americans, we're going to go straight to our head and go, well, what does that mean, trust? And we're going to go to some concept and we're going to define trust. Yet if you really take in that the word trust, it's not just a belief, it's not just a story that we have in our head, it's an actual felt sense in our bodies. We all know what it feels like in our bodies to trust. And so if we really slow down and pay attention and we befriend our bodies, a lot of us are afraid of what happens in our bodies. When we really slow down and pay attention, you will notice that a lot of these kinds of things, there is an actual felt sense that comes with it. There's an internal experience of these kinds of things like trust. And I'd be curious to see the study. I am aware that Finland is always at the top, and I'm curious about what the factors are. And I would be willing to bet money that whatever the factors are, that there is absolutely a felt sense anchored to those factors.
Yeah. I mean, this is really what we don't talk about. We get the reports and, they come across and they're in some Gallup poll or they're, some Cosmo, something, right? They're in some kind of magazine. But what we're really talking about is learning to live, as you said, here we're living. How are we living? What are we doing in the American culture? Mind over human experiences and other things. So what is the takeaway from this, from where you sit, right? What is the irony in all of this? If we see ourselves living from the neck down, what are we not seeing? But mostly, is any of it going to get us to the place we really long to be? I would love for you to talk about that, because in this world we live in, worry is not the place of the present, but we do it. Stress, substance abuse, achievement validation, the dreaded performance review. All of these things happen, and yet we don't have to talk about them as addictions. We can learn something where we integrate these things into our lives in a healthy, modified way. But most of the time we don't. What's your take on them?
Well, I think what happens, Dr. Pat, and you brought up some great examples. And I'm just going to state the obvious. I know we've stated this before, is American culture values the mind over human experience. It values intellect over human experience. And, when you discuss these certain kinds of things, what you will discover, and I believe that this is, we talk about epidemics and pandemics. I think that we have an epidemic, and the epidemic is we have turned away from ourselves. Our focus is out from us and out there. And, you mentioned social media being a billion dollar, it might be trillion dollar industry. And it is by far the single most variable that is taking us out of our bodies chronically. And yet, we have all these other things that are coming from, there's addiction to social media, there's addiction to TV, there's addiction to stress and worry, there's addiction to substances. All of these things are at the core an avoidance. What is the avoidance? Avoidance of experience, terror of what happens in the body. Now, here's the crazy part. You want to get into irony.
Come on.
Irony here.
Bring it on.
Our human nature, our basic human nature is to be in our body. We are born into a body. We're not born into a mind. We're born into a body. And you don't have to take my word for it. Any of our listeners who are around small children, anybody who knows anything about human development, an infant does not have a mind. It only has a body, and it experiences the world fully, completely, no resistance, no excuses through its body. It can teach us something in that regard.
Let me just point to this, and let's tie it back into this study. The study talks about nuances. See, I love when people do study and then they talk about nuances, because the nuance is where the gold nugget is. But they also broke this down by generation. They really had to break happiness down by age, and they go through a big, y'all can get the study online. But there's one thing they talk about that they attribute the rise in happiness to. And it's not going to be what y'all think. I looked at it and it made sense to me. It's called benevolence. And they talk about benevolence by generation. So let's talk about what you're talking about and this word, the body, right? Not the mind. Let's just stay with this. What did this mean? So their deal is they discovered that the COVID crisis led to a worldwide increase in the proportion of people who have helped others in need. Physically helped others in need, not mentally. I mean, I don't know. They could have done, but they physically did something. We're not talking about that. However, let's talk about it. Any program you go to recover from any addiction, which we mentioned, I don't know what y'all are doing or how you do it, but I will tell you that anybody that walks through the doors of a 12-step program, one of the first things you're going to get service. They don't want to hear from you. They want you to, back in the day, okay, I'm going to date myself. Back in the day, your job was to go in the alley and pick up all the cigarette butts. That's one thing. Or clean the bathrooms. I mean, why? Why were they getting you to use your body? Why were they doing this? Why does this study call out that the increase in benevolence has been largely for all generations, all of them, but for those born since 1980? What? So stop dissing the millennials. Now, stop. You see, the most horrific of situations, which we see COVID as being, well, actually, I think in my lifetime, the worst was the economic downturn, which we never talk about. But when we talk about this, how did this kind of support in an environment, Dr. A, I know you have to answer this question, but COVID shut us down. So how did this show up? If you can't be around people, how did this thing show up? What happened? What got triggered that out of the gate, people born after 1980 boosted up their care for other human beings and drastically influence this happiness report. We should do a whole show on the report, don't you think?
That would be really
But
interesting.
think about it. You're talking about the body,
Mhm. Mhm.
but we have so much emphasis on the mind. And I'm not diminishing mindset because that's part of the equation. I'd love to know what you think when we come back from break because it's a little shocking. Do you know they attributed 6 lines to this little blurb? You'd have blown right by this if you didn't read the report.
That's
Is it
crazy.
just me? Am I like a little crazy? I think we should take a little break and then come back and really let's talk about the rest of this because part of this is how does the body focus on sensation? Does it apply to all these new happy people because they're doing things what to help other people physically do something?
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about how to start living from the neck down. You're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat. We're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat, and we're going to just dive into this neck down stuff. But before we do that, Dr. Pat, I do want to follow up on your question at the end of the last segment is, what do I think was going on? I think it's interesting. I want to highlight, and I want to make sure that I heard it accurately, and I want to highlight this for the listeners. What I heard you say that one of the major findings of this study was that increased happiness came from COVID and that there was more benevolent behavior, particularly for those born after 1980. So did I get that right?
Yeah, that's the way they presented it in their very short overview. And you got to dig deeper to really get it. But they called it benevolence by generation. And it led to, they call it a worldwide increase in the proportion of people who have helped others in need. You see, that's what they're talking. They call it benevolence, right? But it's what you said. It's people in the COVID crisis, people got back to their nature, which was to love and to help, right? That's why we're still, people always ask, well, they don't ask. They don't ask, why are we still here as a species? Can you imagine if people of certain tribes kept the secrets of healing to themselves and didn't share it? I mean, these are the things which we're known for. Humanity has been known for before we were known for other things, but we were known for the survival of ourselves through collaboration, yes, and war, but through collaboration, through the things that we could share. This was shocking for them to see the increase very large for all generations, but especially for those born since 1980.
That's really powerful, Dr. Pat. And it's interesting because I think about my own experience of COVID. And I would say that I would put myself in that same category that COVID actually got me closer to myself and a greater sense of what was important and what was more meaningful to me in my life and greater purpose and joy. And so my theory would be, well, what was the mechanism here? What happened? And I think what happened is the external world was closed off from us. We didn't have all of the things to take our attention. We weren't continually and chronically distracted about the next best thing. We kind of hunkered down. And I think what happened is it had us go into our basic nature. And what's our basic nature? I mean, at the core of our being, we are joy. We don't have to find it. It's in us. At the core of our being, we are love. Altruism is our nature. We are connected. Community is our nature. And we have gotten so far away from it. We've gotten so far away from our humanity and our human experience. And I think COVID brought us back to that to some degree.
Yeah, I think also when we think about this, and they're very the research is very heavy on looking at different ages, but there's a missing link here, and I want to point to it. The missing link is this generation of people, and they say since 1980, I think they're making a general reference, right? And if you fast forward and you look at where the people born in the 80s are sitting today, right, in the world. So let's take a look at what they've gone through. Let's start with 9/11. Let's start with who were you during 9/11? So let's start with that. Then let's go to the worst economic downturn we've ever had. What did they experience? What did they see their parents experience, right? So now you have this generation. I'm not saying there are not other generations, but this in particular, this generation was like being born during World War I and World War II. Because that same impact, if you were born during World War I and then you got hit with World War II, you came out of that with an absolute sure bet that there would be World War III. There was no question. You ever talk to anybody that went through that? I have. They come out of that and, they're building concrete shelters in their basement because that's how strong that belief was. But what did this generation believe? Why did they become so altruistic about this? What did those downturns, those global events have on them, especially those here? What happened? And then what did the COVID crisis bring out in them? You see, this is the world of psychology that you and I love to explore, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. You got my wheels turning. But I want to make sure I stay on task here, Dr. Bat. But yes, you got me going on all of this. It's very fascinating to me. And we'll pull it back to the real experience of our humanness, right? And I do want to talk about, I think we are so far away from our humanness. We're so far away from our humanity that we don't know how to be in our bodies. And people avoid their bodies like the plague. We talked about addictions and avoidance and all these things that people do to get away from that. And I think COVID kind of slowed that down. And, what I can do for the listeners is take a few moments to teach them, to help them, learn how can I get back in my body? Because my body has everything. What's in my being, I am completely equipped. I've got everything in here, and I just want to reconnect with that. And I do have some recommendations. I have some golden nuggets to help the listeners get back into their bodies and be friends with their bodies, and rather than have their bodies be adversaries. And there are a lot of things that are available. Like for example, I recommend, and I started with this, I'll be really honest with you, I am a former in my head all the time person. And my first step into getting into my being, I actually was yoga. I could not quiet my mind down enough to meditate or to go deep within my being. And my first step was yoga. And I will tell you, it was powerful, because if I didn't stay in my body, I would fall. Or if I didn't stay in my body, I would lose my balance. And so it really trained me. And so that would be a great first step for listeners if they're interested in really getting back into their bodies, is to participate in some kind of body-centered activity like yoga, like Tai Chi, and it just brings the brain naturally. You don't even have to work hard at it. It naturally brings your focus of your mind into your body. It's a great way to get back into your body. Once you get through that gate, you can also look at meditation is amazing. And meditation, you can go into your body and just be with it. Pay attention, just notice. There aren't any right answers here. There are no wrong answers here. What do you notice in your body? What are the sensations? What do you feel? Tightness? Do you feel pain? Do you feel heat? Do you feel cold? And there's nothing fearing about that. It's just what our bodies do as a way to communicate. And you can take that a step further. Not only go to the sensation, but you can play with it. Again, like children, playing, open mind, beginner's mind. Go to the sensation and say, hey, if you had words, what would you say to me? What would you say to me? What would you tell me? What would be the story behind this tightness in my hip or something? And this is practice. That's all it is practice. And I recommend that listeners, commit 15 minutes a day. Just make a commitment. It doesn't have to look a particular way. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. 15 minutes a day. Close out the world. Turn off the TV, turn off social media, turn off all the stimulation, and just go within and just be with whatever presents itself. And I promise you, the body will cooperate. It is a willing partner.
Well, you just answered the question. What is it about that generation that was cited and what you just shared What is the direct correlation between benevolence and your invitation to the body? It's simple. From 1980 on, we became known as the physical movement. See, this all makes sense. We don't have time to talk about it, but it'd be great to do a show on it. What happened in 1980? Olivia Newton-John, physical. Jane Fonda, fitness movement. Olivia Newton-John, the entire decade, that song was #1. So what if, hello, this is what if? What if that movement, which did continue, but there were people born, hopped in, 80s, 90s, hello, right? Beyonce doing crazy dancing. Physical increase in our physical attention to who we are. So it's not a mystery if I take everything you just said and the results of that report on happiness.
Great connection there, Dr. Pat. Good.
Well, you gave the answer. I mean, but this is something that all of you should really look at this. Because I think what you'll find is when we don't have physical movement, the results and the consequences are devastating. But doesn't it make sense from a common sense perspective? Oh yeah, people born after 1980, it would make sense. Why? Because Dr. A just said so. It's all below the neck.
All below the neck. And we're going to end there, Dr. Pat. Stay tuned for the next podcast of the Empowered Living Zone. I look forward to sharing more with you. And before we end today, if you're curious about empowered living or psychospiritual transformational life coaching, or you would like to work with me directly, contact me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. I want to thank Dr. Pat, as always, for being an inspiring partner. Thank you to all my listeners for tuning into the Empowered Living Zone. I had a wonderful time. Please join me every first and third Tuesday of every month, 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific Time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.